The truth did not arrive gently, and it did not give me time to brace myself. It entered my life quietly, disguised as an ordinary moment, and then shattered everything I thought was real. I did not know it yet, but the version of my life I trusted ended that evening, even though the world around me continued as if nothing had changed. I was standing in my kitchen, distracted by routine thoughts that no longer mattered, when the smallest interruption altered the course of my existence. In my hand was my phone, still glowing from a message that was never meant for me to read. And in that instant, I understood something that made my chest tighten in fear. The people I trusted most had not just betrayed me. They had been living comfortably inside my life while rewriting it behind my back. My name is Isabella, and until that moment, I believed I had built my world on loyalty, patience, and honesty. I was married to Victor, a man I trusted, with my future, my reputation, and my vulnerabilities. And my closest friend was Naomi, the person I had leaned on for years, never once imagining that betrayal could grow so easily between two people I loved without reservation. The truth became clear because of Daniel, a neutral presence in my life, someone I had never suspected, and someone who had no reason to lie. Daniel was a coworker of Victor's, polite but distant, the kind of person who existed on the edges of our social circle without ever inserting himself into personal matters. That night, he had sent Victor a message, meant to be professional, meant to be harmless, but delivered to the wrong recipient. Delivered to me, the message referenced a dinner reservation, a familiar restaurant, and a name that made my hands go cold. Naomi's name. At first, my mind resisted the conclusion, scrambling for explanations that would protect me from what my instincts already knew. But denial collapsed quickly when memory joined the evidence. The same restaurant Victor had claimed he disliked. The same nights he had been unavailable. The same sudden changes in routine Naomi had brushed off as coincidences. I searched further, not because I wanted to, but because my body seemed to move on its own, driven by a need for certainty. Even if certainty destroyed me. A receipt I recognized. A shared calendar entry. A pattern that repeated itself with cruel consistency. There was no room left for misunderstanding. The realization hit slowly and then all at once. Victor was not working late. Naomi was not busy. They were together. Not once, not accidentally. Repeatedly, deliberately. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. My body reacted before my heart could catch up, as if it needed distance from the devastation it had just absorbed. My breathing became shallow, my limbs heavy, and my thoughts scattered, as the life I believed in collapsed, quietly inside my chest. Victor was not just my husband. He was the man I trusted with my fears, the man I defended even when he disappointed me. Naomi was not just a friend. She was the woman who sat beside me, who listened to my worries, who spoke about loyalty as if it were sacred. The cruelty was not only the affair itself, but the intimacy of the deception, the ease with which they had dismantled my trust while pretending to protect it. That night, I wandered through my home like a stranger. Familiar rooms felt contaminated, memories echoing off the walls in ways that made my stomach turn. Photographs that once felt comforting now felt accusatory, reminders of how convincingly they had lied to my face. I slid down against the kitchen counter, my body finally giving in as tears arrived without restraint, heavy and relentless. I cried for my marriage, but I also cried for myself, for the woman who believed loyalty would always be returned, for the version of me who trusted without suspicion, for the humiliation of realizing that my pain had been someone else's secret thrill. The days that followed blurred together. I functioned mechanically, waking up, going to work, answering messages, and pretending my life was intact while inside I was unraveling. Sleep came in fragments, and when it came, it brought dreams that ended the moment. I remembered the truth, leaving me exhausted before the day even began. What hurt most was not just losing my marriage, but losing my sense of safety. Betrayal from strangers wounds the heart, but betrayal from the people closest to you fractures your identity. I questioned my judgment, my memories, and my worth. I wondered how long I had been the only honest person in rooms where everyone else already knew the truth. Silence tempted me. The idea of swallowing the truth and letting it rot quietly felt easier than confrontation. But as the shock dulled, something else surfaced beneath the grief. Anger, not reckless anger, but controlled, deliberate fury that sharpened my resolve. I understood then that staying silent would not preserve my dignity. It would erase it. They would move forward without consequences, rewriting the story, while I carried the shame alone. I did not want quiet revenge. I wanted accountability. I learned where they met. I learned when they felt safe. I learned how confident they had become in their betrayal, convinced that I was broken, unaware or too afraid to act. One evening, with my heart still bruised, but my mind terrifyingly clear, I stood outside the restaurant where their lie had been living. Through the glass, I could see them together, relaxed, unaware that the woman, whose life they had destroyed, was about to step into their illusion. In that moment, I understood something that would stay with me forever. Some betrayals do not deserve silence. Some truths must be spoken where there is nowhere left to hide. And as I reached for the door, I knew that once I stepped inside, nothing would ever be the same again. The moment I pushed that door open, the world shifted in a way I cannot fully explain. The restaurant was warm, crowded, alive with laughter that felt foreign to me. Like I had stepped into a version of reality where pain was optional and loyalty still existed. For a second, I hesitated, not because I doubted myself, but because I understood the cost of what I was about to do. Once I crossed that room, there would be no retreat into silence, no pretending I had misunderstood, no comforting lie to crawl back into. When the night ended, I saw them immediately. Victor and Naomi were seated together, as if the space belonged to them, leaning toward each other with an ease that made my stomach tighten. There was no urgency, no fear, no guilt visible in their posture. They looked like two people who had rehearsed this moment many times, confident that the woman they were betraying existed only as an abstract inconvenience somewhere else. I stood there longer than I expected. Not frozen, but observing. I needed to see them clearly, without the filter of love or denial. I needed to imprint that image into my memory so that later, when doubt tried to soften what they had done, I would remember how comfortable they were inside my destruction. As I walked toward their table, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The shock had already passed. The grief had already carved its place. In my chest, what remained was clarity. Each step felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, like I was carrying the truth into a space that had been built on lies. They noticed me too late. The shift in their expressions was subtle but unmistakable. Victor's confidence collapsed first, his body stiffening as recognition hit him. Naomi's reaction followed a heartbeat later, her composure cracking just enough to confirm everything I already knew. There was no confusion in their eyes, only fear at being seen. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. I stood there long enough for the reality of my presence to fully register, for them to understand that this was not a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over later. People around us began to notice the tension, the sudden silence at the table that had moments ago been relaxed and intimate. I let the moment stretch. I wanted them to feel exposed, not attacked. I wanted the weight of their choices to press down on them, without me having to explain a single word. In that space, surrounded by strangers, they were no longer protected by secrecy, or familiarity. They were simply two people who had been caught. What surprised me was not their shame, but how small they looked once the lie was no longer private. Betrayal thrives in darkness. Under public light, it shrinks. The anger I had carried did not explode the way I imagined it might. Instead, it focused. I reached out and struck Victor across the face. Not with chaos, but with intention. The sound cut through the room sharply. A physical punctuation mark, too. Months of deception. Gasps followed. Heads turned. The atmosphere changed instantly. I did not regret it. That moment was not about violence. It was about reclaiming presence. About refusing to remain invisible in a story where my life had been treated like a background detail. I stayed long enough for everyone to understand that something serious had happened. Long enough for whispers to begin forming. Long enough for the narrative to slip out of Victor's control. I did not need to say anything. Their faces said enough. Guilt has a way of announcing itself when it has nowhere left to hide. I walked out of the restaurant without looking back, my heart pounding but my spine straight. Outside, the night air felt sharp and grounding, as if the world itself was acknowledging that something irreversible had just occurred. That confrontation was not the end. It was the opening. In the days that followed, I did what I had once been too loyal to consider. I told the truth, not emotionally, not dramatically, but thoroughly. I exposed the affair to Victor's family, to Naomi's family, and to the people who mattered most in both of their lives. I did not exaggerate. I did not seek sympathy. I presented facts, timelines, evidence, and consistency. What followed was not instant justice, but something more powerful: isolation. Victor lost the respect he had taken for granted. Naomi lost the trust she had assumed was unbreakable. Their families, forced to confront the reality of who they were defending, began to pull away. Invitations stopped. Support thinned. Conversations became uncomfortable. Accountability has a way of eroding relationships that were built on image rather than integrity. Their relationship did not survive the exposure. Without secrecy, without the thrill of deception, what they had was ordinary and heavy with consequence. The very thing that had bonded them began to suffocate them. They could not lean on each other without being reminded of what it had cost. I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction but with certainty. I did not need them to suffer dramatically. I needed them to face themselves without escape. As for me, I filed for divorce. The process was exhausting, emotionally draining, and humbling in ways I had not anticipated. But with every document signed and every tie severed, I felt something return to me that I thought I had lost forever: agency, ownership, self-respect. I moved out quietly. I rebuilt slowly. I stopped explaining myself to people who had not lived inside my silence. Healing did not arrive as relief. It arrived as strength. By the time the divorce was finalized, Victor and Naomi were no longer together. Their shared destruction had not been enough to sustain a future. They had lost not only each other, but the families and reputations that once anchored them. And I was alone? But I was not broken. For the first time since the betrayal, I slept without fear. I woke without dread. I recognized myself again in the mirror, not as someone who had been abandoned, but as someone who had chosen truth over comfort. I did not win by keeping them. I won by walking away whole. And that was only the beginning. After everything collapsed, silence became my companion. Not the painful silence of abandonment, but the deliberate quiet that follows truth when it has finished doing its damage. My life no longer revolved around explanations or reactions. There were no more confrontations left to stage, no more truths left to expose. What remained was me, standing alone, in the aftermath of a war one never chose but refused to lose. The divorce finalized on a morning that felt strangely ordinary. I remember sitting alone afterward, not overwhelmed with relief or grief, but with something steadier: acceptance. The marriage that had defined years of my identity was officially over, and instead of feeling erased, I felt returned to myself. Victor was no longer my responsibility, and Naomi was no longer a presence I needed to process. They had moved into a chapter of their lives written entirely by consequence. The fallout continued long after I stepped away. Victor's family did not rally around him the way he expected. Their disappointment did not explode outward. It withdrew. Support turned into distance. Conversations shortened. Invitations disappeared. He was no longer defended, only tolerated. And even that faded with time. Reputation does not shatter in a single moment. It erodes slowly until one day you realize you are standing alone where community once existed. Naomi's unraveling was quieter, but no less severe. The people who once trusted her instincts began to question her motives. Her closeness was reinterpreted as intrusion. Her concern felt rehearsed. The friendships she believed were permanent became conditional, then distant, then gone. She lost not because she was exposed publicly, but because no one could unsee what she was capable of. They lost each other too. What they had relied on was secrecy and illusion. Once stripped of those, there was nothing strong enough left to survive scrutiny. Their relationship did not end in dramatic collapse. It ended in disinterest, exhaustion, and resentment. The betrayal that once bonded them became the reason they could no longer trust one another. I did not watch closely. I did not need updates. Their punishment was not my focus anymore. My focus was rebuilding a life that belonged entirely to me. I moved to a smaller place, not because I had to, but because I wanted space that felt intentional, rather than inherited. I removed objects that carried memories I no longer wished to negotiate with. I redesigned my routines, my priorities, and my expectations of people. Healing did not come as forgiveness. It came as clarity. There were moments when loneliness crept in, especially during quiet evenings, when the world slowed down and my thoughts had room to wander. But loneliness felt different than betrayal. Loneliness was honest. It did not lie to me. It did not pretend to love me while dismantling my trust. I learned to sit with myself without distraction. I learned the difference between being alone and being diminished. I learned that peace does not always feel joyful at first. Sometimes it feels empty, and that emptiness is necessary too. Make room for something real. The neutral presence who had quietly observed parts of my journey. Someone who had never chosen sides or pushed opinions reminded me, through actions rather than words, that integrity still existed. Not everyone was capable of betrayal. Not everyone saw loyalty as optional. That realization grounded me when bitterness threatened to take root. I stopped replaying the past. I stopped wondering how long the affair had lasted or how many lies had been told. Closure did not come from knowing everything. It came from knowing enough. Enough to leave. Enough to stand firm. Enough to never beg for respect again. Months later, I ran into people who once existed on the edges of my married life. They looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with curiosity, but with recognition. As someone who had been tested publicly and survived privately. As someone who did not crumble when the truth demanded strength. Victor became a name I rarely thought about. Naomi became a lesson rather than a wound. Their choices no longer followed me. They stayed where they belonged, in a chapter that had closed permanently. I did not rebuild to prove anything to them. I rebuilt because I deserved a life that did not require silence to survive. The most unexpected part of it all was the satisfaction. Not the sharp, vindictive kind, but the deep, quiet knowing that justice had occurred without me having to destroy myself in the process. They lost families. They lost trust. They lost the future they believed they were clever enough to steal. I lost illusions, and that loss freed me. I walked away without shouting, without dragging the past behind me, without carrying shame that was never mine. I walked away whole, self-possessed, and finally honest with myself about what I would never accept again. Some people think revenge requires cruelty. I learned that the most powerful revenge is visibility, truth, and the refusal to remain small so others can remain comfortable. They betrayed me in secret. I faced them in public, and then I chose myself. That choice rebuilt everything. If betrayal comes from the two people you trusted the most, would you have confronted them publicly or walked away silently?